we're leveling off on numbers, so I'm going to get started. G'day, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I currently am in Seattle, despite my Australian accent. I apologize if I speak quickly or you can't understand me. I will try and be more articulate. Welcome to the roundtable on best practices for mobile UI design. I am so excited about this one because I know almost nothing about designing mobile UI. I have written books on user interface, user design, web design, stuff like that, but I've never tried to apply it to mobile. So I'm really excited about that. But that's enough about me as your host. I want to really sort of get into introducing you to our panel. So today we've got some great speakers from all around, and it's a great sort of rounded out list. So first we have Miha from Outfit 7. He's a principal software engineer. Soren from Samsung, who is part of the developer relations team. Yeah, feel free to wave, smile, you know. Benoit, who's one of our technical product managers that I work with regularly here at Unity, and Stefania, one of our product designers around UI tools. These are all things that great sort of parts of the business, UI tools, our sort of technical management, stuff like that, that will really sort of help round out the conversation we have today. So what are we talking about? Well, as hopefully you sort of might have figured out from the title, we're really going to talk about UI design and how to manage that process and have team collaboration work effectively and efficiently so you can create mobile user interfaces that really engage with the players and really help your game be navigable and playable. We're going to look at the right tools that you should look at to create and document your UI, and then find ways of how you test your UI and performance. And then finally, looking at some mobile device specific challenges of things that you can sort of consider, some gotchas, and some maybe some little hints and cheats that Soren and crew might sort of impart on us. Normally what we do is we do if you've been part of one of our webinars before this year, we've been doing a sort of developer life cycle, start from design, go through to operations. But today we're just going to do like sort of focus on these topics because they're so critical across the entire development life cycle. So we're actually sort of going to focus on these things instead. What I want to start with is actually, Miha, let's start with you and talk about how you look at UI in games, what you consider good UI, and maybe what you consider maybe not so good. Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, and hello to everyone from my side as well. For me, or like my experience is that a lot of people connect good UI in games with good looking UI first, but for me, the UI is not only about the art. So for me, it's like a joint effort of different departments, since just like many things in games, also UI is deeply coupled with other things. And in the case of UI, this of course means good art representation of the UI. And in the case of UI, we can say that UI is also very connected with the user experience, for example, also with the animations. And all this make the UI not only look good, but also feel good and intuitive, right? And then at the end is, of course, also the technical performance of it. And this is especially important on mobile because you can have the UI done by the best possible art, UX, and animation team. However, all this won't help you if you're running on the device with a terrible frame rate, or if the game is draining your battery like crazy. So yeah, for me, this is a good UI.
Good start. Good start. Anyone else want to sort of add anything to that about what makes good UI?
I think Miha, you kind of covered it well, but I think it's just describing all the characteristic and properties of UI. It shows something very I feel like obvious that it's really complicated to make good UI. It requires a lot of different skill sets from, you know, creatives, designers to engineering. So we underestimate the complexity of making good UI, because you can, like you said, you can be beautiful, but sometimes it can be in the way, it can feel awkward or inefficient. But yeah, it's, quite challenging.
I saw a comment in the chat just now that said, good UI means good fonts. But I think we'd probably all agree that is part of it, right? But it's there's a lot more, right? There's all sorts of stuff there. But on fonts, I do want to just sort of comment on a game I just played recently. I don't know if I can sort of talk about it, but it was Pentiment. Sorry, but they had it right up front. They have all these weird fonts, right? They have, because they're set in the sort of medieval ages, they have a bunch of different fonts. But at the very beginning, when you load up the game, it says, do you want to use all these fonts, or are they hard to read? We'll give you some simpler fonts to read. I thought that was really good, a really good example of a UI design around fonts, that they want to have immersiveness, but they also want to give the option for people who might find that difficult. How does that resonate with you guys?
Yes, and I think it's also a larger scope of accessibility in general. So whether that comes to the actual fonts that are used, or the contrast that you see in a UI, or being able to just even dismiss the UI if you need to, if it's too much cognitive overload, that all comes into accessibility, which is just a part of a good user experience in general. So that's
Awesome.
Good example.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because it contributes to readability, essentially, like how easy for me to read what the information on screen. And then there's another challenge to font selection. If you want, normally you want to reach a wide, broad audience with your game, so you need to consider all different languages, and finding a font that's suitable for all of those and suitable for your medium on mobile device can have, you know, different resolution, screen size. So I'd be interested to know, Miha, what's your process for selecting a good font, suitable font for your game?
About the font specific, you mean? Yeah. Well, where should I start? Because it's not that easy. But maybe I can wrap it up in the entire process of the creation of the UI, because like you already said, the UI, it's quite complex area. And also the process of creating the whole UI, it's quite complex also here at Outwit 7. So I'll just try to do a short summary of it. So first, before we start even designing the whole UI, of course, we start with the goals, right? To understand them. So what are the goals from the business perspective? What are the goals from emotional perspective? And at the end, what are the goals also from the design perspective also, right? So, and then the second step is research, right? So this basically means what is already out there, right? What is good, what is bad, and then deciding based on that. And then the next step would be the exploring, right? So that means exploring different ideas, brainstorming, checking references, and so on. And here, of course, we would also check the references, right, for the fonts and our previous experience with them and so on. After explore phase, we would usually start with generating the ideas and also visualize them in a way of a mind map. And here we are then usually focused only on some core elements like buttons or text and font styles, different pop-up styles maybe. And the next step after that is to involve UX team also into that, right? And then preparing different UI style proposal based on the UX flow. Also here, I can mention, right, with different fonts, and then checking what looks good, what doesn't look good, and so on. And then based on all this, we are ready to go into this final design, right? So based on that, we pick one design which we like the best, or that we are happy with based on our previous experience, and then we start polishing, and after all, we start with the implementation.
How quickly do you get user feedback on that? I know I'm going to jump around, I apologize, but I'm really interested in what you just said, because there's a lot that goes into even before starting the design, right? Just starting the game itself. So when do you bring in, say, user feedback or user testing to ensure that your intent, your intent, plan of intent, sorry, is actually going to work out for your players?
Yeah, so basically for like when we are so early in the production, we can user test, of course, but of course on much smaller scale of the users, right? And here we are gonna test maybe like with color blinded people, for example, right? What we can do around that. However, regarding the visuals, I would say that the art team, I mean, is quite capable of selecting the one that they like the most. So what we're not going to do, for example, is try to go there with 3 different styles and then check what works the best, right, for our audience, because we are quite capable on our art team, so that they are able to select one which will work the best.
Awesome. Does anyone else want to sort of add into that? I have so many questions for Miha. I want to make sure some of you also have a chance. So I know you haven't spoken yet. Did you want to add anything around thinking about like this kind of stuff at the upfront?
So I haven't been involved in creating a UI for a game as such. I'm a little bit better on the technical aspects. But just jumping quick back to what characterize good UI, I would definitely, from a gamer's perspective, I would say clear, concise, and sometimes less is more as well. Like, but yeah.
So
Kind of minimalist design and flat UI.
Yes.
That's
well, what I was going to ask, sorry, on that, just yes, you obviously haven't designed UI yourself, but is that technical side of it a factor in that early planning as well, to ensure that, hey, we're going to do this to make sure we cater for color blindness, or we're going to do that to have different types of fonts? Where does the consideration for, hey, there might be some technical limitations or performance limitations in implementing UI?
Yeah, so because there's so many different devices out there, I think it's very important for the for the art team and the tech team to really utilize the different devices, the different screen sizes, the best, and the earlier states, I would say, the better, especially when it comes to foldable phones. A lot of people tend to think, oh, we will just do that last minute. But I would highly recommend to do it as early as possible. And also, saying that is because with foldable phones, there's so many creative things you can do. But we will cover that later on. And also, yeah, just in general, I think probably make a dynamic UI, because the art team and just the game evolve a lot throughout the development, and the amount of changes that are in a game from the very early stage to when it's released is quite big. So the more dynamic as possible. There's a fine balance, because if you're going to make too dynamic UI, that'll kind of take down in performance as well. So so there's a fine balance there, definitely.
Awesome. Yeah, cool. Hey, so let's keep moving. I just looked over at the Q&A, and there are so many questions coming in from the audience. As a reminder, audience, if you do want to have a question answered, please put it in the Q&A, not in the chat. The chat, it's a little harder to manage what we're doing there, but there's a bunch of questions there. We're not going to get to them all, but I will pick some to sort of supplement our conversation here. But for now, I want to talk, Miha, at Outfit 7. When you're working on the UI and throughout the entire development process, how many people would actually be part of that process, like from design to implementation? How many people actually have to be involved?
Yeah, so if you are only if you are talking only about the UI artists, then I think the number will be roughly like 3 or 4 people. But of course, this depends on the game that we are doing. But then if you are talking about the number of developers, for example, it's a bit harder to say, because in our case, it's like that at some point, every developer will need to touch a little bit of the UI at some point, most probably. And yeah, however, there will be maybe 2 or 3 developers per game who will supervise the technical part of, let's say, more than 80% of the entire UI implementation. But yeah, lastly, we shouldn't forget about animators, VFX artists, and the UX team, and then they are also included in this UI implementation at the end, right? And then if we also count them into the final number, then I guess this final number of people would be around 10 people in our case. But of course, all this depends on the game and genre and complexity and so on.
Sure. No, that's it's a lot, right? It's not just a simple, let's throw some text on a screen. Benoit, how did that sit with you and your experience with other developers you've worked with?
That resonates well. And different sizes of teams, different sizes of studios will also have different kind of roles. As you get smaller teams, people need to wear a lot of hats normally in game production. So you're going to have generalist designers or programmers having to work on UI, game designers who, defining what will be the flow of the game, the mock-ups. So yeah, and you said around 10 people and to win, and that's for a production of how many people? Like it would be like a third of the team or a fifth of the team, Mia?
Sorry, what? I got interrupted a little bit. Can you?
So you said you're about 10 people working on UI in a typical production, but on a how large is the entire team working on the game?
The entire team, yeah. I guess like it's again hard to say because it depends on the game, but it's for sure more than 30 or 40. So yeah.
That's typical for most production, especially most titles, especially on mobile, has so much screen, so much game system, so much UI to be built that you need a lot of resources.
So let me ask the next question then. Again, Miha, you're our game developer of the day. What point do your UI artists or the design team actually become involved in implementing that UI in Unity?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I can say that here at Outwit 7, we already tried a lot of different approaches. So for example, we try to involve UI artists really soon into the Unity implementation, or we try to involve them really late, and also and we also tried to involve them somewhere in the middle of the production, right? And even today, after all these experiments, right, it's hard to me to say what works the best. And at the end, I think it's up to the team's knowledge, their experience, and how familiar the team members are with Unity. So it's really hard for me to say what works the best, but I can say that we tried it all.
I know that different studios work differently. Do all of your UI artists and designers know how to use Unity, or do you keep them sort of separated from the Unity sort of process?
Yeah, in my experience, I worked with both, but now I think nowadays we are involving them more and more into the Unity implementation as well. So they eventually need to get familiar with it.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think we'll get into this in a little bit, but Stefania and Benoit, I think UI Toolkit goes a long way to help those non-programmer types sort of take advantage of some of the things, right? So
yeah, and even I'll leave that for a bit later, but when I was working in games, my hump of understanding and learning Unity with my background of design and UX design primarily, easing into UI design, it needed time to get to know Unity the way that I needed it to function compared to the other software that I was using to build UI and create good user flows. But once I got that, it was really, really beneficial as a UI designer to understand the reasons why and how everything was being built in Unity and in the scene so that I could better understand how to design the UI and know when it made sense to layer assets versus not, while exporting them for use in the actual implementation. So even though it made me essentially the UI implementer at the studio, and all of our designers became versed in Unity implementation, the benefits very vastly outweighed any sort of time needed to really dig in and understand how to use Unity, because we were just better equipped with the knowledge of how things are going to end up. And it also allowed us to have ownership for the UI and make changes that, you don't want to bug a dev who is, building a whole front end or back end to move something 2 pixels. So it was very beneficial, but I've also worked at studios where that wasn't the case, and other designers, weren't super familiar with Unity implementation. So I agree with what Miha is saying. It depends on who you work with, but the investment to learn it, I think, is super beneficial.
Cool. Thanks. I'm gonna throw a couple of curveballs from the audience because I need to release that pressure valve a little because there's so many questions there. The first question I wanted to do was Kaelion asks Miha, on average, how long does it take you to go from concept to actual delivery of the UI? Typically, is it days, weeks, months? What's the sort of timeline there?
Oh, yeah, it depends a lot on the feature that we are making. However, I would say that on average is like it could be like 2 weeks in the best case. It could be 1 month. It could be 2 months. For more complex things, can even be more. But I would say that's like on average, it would be something like this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing people don't sort of take into account is there's these things that they consider minor implementations, or they think, oh, it's just going to be easy. As I said, slap some text on the screen. But to do UI right, you need to be really thoughtful about the whole approach, and it takes time, right? It takes time to get it right.
Exactly.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm going to throw this one to you. Oh yeah, Benoit.
I just want to add is there's also potentially ways to optimize or reduce that time frame. Like I said, that you start from a constant phase. You want to do some A/B testing, some validation, as much as possible. If you can iterate without being in the engine, before doing the implementation, you have much more velocity, much more agility. So you can save a lot of time if you do that exploration and that validation before getting into like a final product. And then you get to a whole new other phase of iteration and more improvements to the UI. But being smart about that can save you a lot of time.
Yeah, awesome. Great, good add, good build on. Yeah, sorry, I'm going to throw this one to you. You may just want to defer it to someone else, but someone, Silvio asked about mobile UI and how to account for both orientations. Are there any sort of best practices to consider when we're thinking about the hardware? As simple as, hey, I'm in portrait mode, now I go to landscape mode, but I still want my game to function. Do you have any sort of comments on that, on whether there's a cost, a performance hit to think about, and with that sort of duplicated UI?
Was that aimed to me, that question?
Yes.
Yeah. So basically, in Unity, there's like an anchor system and a resizing system that works really well with foldable. So as far as I know, I haven't done actually any profiling of it directly, but we have not noticed there should be any major performance cost because the whole Unity system is actually built in and work really well for foldable phones.
Great. And so
I just want to know, sorry, Andrew, if there is the approach is similar of handling between typical portrait to landscape orientation changes. I'm guessing the cost is similar.
So when it comes to aspect ratio, there will be, it depends a bit how you set up your camera and all that. If you calculate your aspect ratio real time, which is not recommended, of course that is going to take a lot of performance. It will work, but if you go into flex mode, the UI should pick up when it goes into flex mode, and that will be when you're swapping, do the transition from like if it's a fold from cover screen to the big main screen. So if you detect that correctly, you can recalculate the aspect ratio. When it comes to Vulkan, it's slightly, if you do support Vulkan, it will be slightly more complicated. But as far as I know, it's built quite well in Unity, and it's I trust you have implemented that well. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think just to clarify to the audience, we're talking about some of the foldable phones that Samsung has been sort of producing over the last little while. So, do you want to talk about some of the added benefits of designing for foldable UI?
So I think in general, when it comes to foldable phones, that's what I was trying to say a little bit earlier. But I think it allows designers to be really creative because they can come up with intuitive solutions. We've seen already quite neat UI being implemented for non-gaming apps that will change the UI in flex mode in order to make better experience for the user. But when it comes to games, that can also be done. So, for example, in flex mode or tabletop mode, a game could rearrange the UI, such as placing more complex UI, like minimap or like items, libraries of items on a screen, and then a separator. So you have another a different screen where all your in-game graphics is. Or you could have like it just one of your screens to have like a virtual game controller if that is more suitable for your game. There's so many. What I'm trying to say is that there's so many creative ways you can use it. It's not only just about like how to set UI up. You can actually change almost part of the gameplay if you do it right. So yeah.
Sure. Cool. Thanks.
Interesting. My assumption was my simplest assumption was you go from a mobile to a tablet, but what you're describing is much more compelling, and you can create a whole new experience essentially because you're using that kind of device.
Yeah, and one of the reason is the size of the device. Like it suits really well, and that's why foldable phones are so popular among gamers. It almost feels like a little a handheld console in some ways, where on a tablet it does a bit more like convoluted to sit with that one. Yeah.
Great. I'm going to start jumping ahead to the next section, just because I'm looking at the time and I want to make sure we cover at least a couple of questions in each. Don't worry, audience, I am still paying attention to some questions. There's some great ones that I want to try and get into a time as well. So let's go with Miha again. What tools do you use to create your UI library, like the assets you're going to use, the fonts, colors, and stuff? Do you have tools that you use to manage that and document that?
Yeah, here I can say we are really like not using any rocket science actually. So we are using mainly well-known tools like good old Photoshop, for example, Trello, Confluence. Lately, we are also using Figma more and more. So yeah, like I said, nothing really special here.
Mm-hmm. Do you use any other tools besides Unity for your UI creation?
Yeah, actually, we are using quite some internal tools which we built in-house in Unity in order to make our life easier. So, for example, we have a tool for managing different font styles, tools for managing different button styles, tool for easier browsing of different screens that we have in the game and their UIs. So we have some animation or so-called twinning scripts, and then a bunch of other helper scripts and so on. And we are mainly using in-house tools since they do exactly what we want without bringing us any extra bloat that we wouldn't want to include in our games. And that's the reason why we are doing like internal in-house tools actually.
Okay, so those tools that you just mentioned, are they like add-ins into the Unity's UI, or are they components that you add to objects? Like how...
Yeah, exactly. They're really tightly integrated into the Unity UI, basically.
Awesome, awesome. So then,
do you make those for artists or for developers or both?
Yeah, for both.
Yeah.
For all departments almost.
yeah, and Benoit, I was actually just going to throw to you because there are so many questions and comments in here in the chat about UI Toolkit, and if we're going to talk about UI Toolkit. So I wanted to just throw to you and Stefania to talk about that a little bit, about how that can actually benefit in this, that exact situation Miha was talking about, building tools for the rest of the team internally. Does UI Toolkit give you some advantage there?
Well, UI Toolkit is designed to eventually replace our existing frameworks. Why we have two right now. I am UI for making editor tools and UI for making game UI. So the idea is to have a single solution, so you can use the same workflows, the same features and technologies to make UI, whatever you want to use them. So it's great because you build an internal expertise, and you can transfer that knowledge from one system to another. So if you want to build tools, and eventually these capabilities can be brought to runtime as well. So if you make a fancy inspector, to kind of debug your things and then configure your different elements of your game, you can bring those at runtime, and then you can still do live debugging and inspection, which is very interesting. And it's also meant for what Stefania was, definitely. And what Stefania meant earlier, the complexity of making UI in general, especially the overhead of learning Unity if you're UI designers or creators. So we're trying to kind of lower the bar with UI Toolkit to have more familiar experience, so it doesn't feel like you need to learn about creating game objects and working in a scene, which can be a little bit awkward. Your first experience. So that's one to achieve with UI. I think it's more approachable, more familiar experience. So that, and then, but leave that same power to developers to build custom tools, custom extension, custom controls in their UI.
That sounds really cool. As I said, I've been looking into the UI Toolkit, and I'm really excited about where it's headed. Like the fact that it's got things like animation of UI and stuff. We'll talk a little bit about that later. What I also want to just give some space for not just UI Toolkit, but other things you might use. And Miha, given you're, as I said, our game developer of the day, were there assets that you pulled from the asset store to help you, or that you found particularly useful during development for UI?
Yeah, like I said in the previous question, so we are mostly relying on in-house tools because, like I said, they're giving us exactly what we want without no additional bloat, and they're doing exactly what we want. So, but still, of course, we are using some external tools. Maybe I can mention one, which I also believe it's available on the asset store, which is called Texture Packer, and we are using it for managing and optimizing sprite sheets. And yeah, like I said, I think it's also available on the asset store. Yeah.
Cool. And then I'll throw to the Unity people. Stefania, Benoit, have you seen some really interesting assets for the UI as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's the long.
I know it's a long
popular asset. I mean, we had mentioned twinning library. There's a lot of those on the asset store that can really help you get, great looking UI, exciting UI, which is and make it performant. There's some other tools for managing flows. That's another thing Miha mentioned, like be able to kind of control how the UI is presented over the life cycle of the game is not something that is very easy to do. In Unity, there's great assets for that as well. And then there's texture packs, themes, font packs. So if you want to get started quickly, get something on screen rapidly to get your prototype going or your first proof of concept, there's a wide variety of things that can accelerate the development of UI.
How do you know? And oh, sorry, Stefani, you were going to add something?
No, yeah, I'm just going to say there's so many good assets on the asset store that if you are trying to do something, there's probably a solution there. So something that I've used in the past is at other studios when we were working in UGUI is like an asset that allowed you to create UI without textures, and that was super helpful and exciting, especially when we were prototyping in Unity, where we didn't want to commit to an art style. We just wanted to have something quick in there that we could work with our devs to figure out how things felt on screen and add some behaviors to, but we didn't want to add assets yet. But it's very exciting because with the UI toolkit, that is actually built in. You can have textureless UI, so it doesn't require anything from the asset store. So it's a positive in my books, but there's so many things on the asset store that are really helpful for anything you need to do.
Thank you. So I just have an out there question. I'm not sure who might want to answer this, but how do you know when you've done enough, right? Like, okay, I've put my score text box on the screen. I'm like, yep, cool. But it's just static numbers, right? It's white, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Then there's the other extreme where I've got animations and tweening and beautiful transitions and sparkly things. And every time someone moves the selection, all this wonderful sound comes out and all that kind of stuff, probably a little over-engineered, right? How do you know when to stop, right? When to stop UI design? Miha, do you want to start with that? Or?
Yeah, sure. It's a really challenging question because you know the answer to that it's never the same. I would say, but mainly I think for that we have a lot of people involved in that process, and we really want to polish a lot of stuff. Like we usually have this problem that maybe we go into like a bit of over engineering at some point. However, like we are solving this with some internal deadlines, and then the dates are holding us back,
Sure.
So maybe that's a good solution.
Yeah, I'd agree with that and add on that yes, scope is definitely a consideration, but also depends on what you're building. So if you're building a casino game, like it's got to be flashy, it's got to be loud. Like of course your UI still needs to be clear and make sense. But then in comparison, if you're building, a more calm game, subdued, something like a Journey vibe, you don't want it to be extreme. You don't want the UI to be in your face. But it all comes down to user testing. So if you're able, even just, even if you're one person, you don't have the resources for a huge, testing scenario, just like handing the thing to someone and just not even saying anything, just seeing what their feedback and reaction is. Do they understand what's happening with all of these sounds and sparkles and whatever going on? And really understanding where that balance lies and seeing if they can provide any feedback about, oh, this button is sparkly. Do I need to tap on it or should I not use it yet? It all comes down to just listening to your users and figuring out what makes sense for your product and your game.
Cool.
That's a very good point. I mean, the best user testing I've seen is when you can't always do that, but if you can film the user's face and expression, how they actually can see confusion, you can see delight when something's happening on screen. So it's very revealing without saying any word. You can learn a lot about how they react to your user interface.
Awesome. Just panel FYI, it seems like the audience is loving the word sparkle. So if you want to pander to them at all, just feel free to keep throwing that in. I want to do I want to give some time to Soren. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions, Soren. The first one is, Are there any tools and resources for the audience to look at in thinking about designing for foldable UI?
Yeah, so our team has written some resources, tutorials for how to set up a foldable UI for Unity, and what that at a technical level involves. We have that on our developer site, free. Anyone can go and give it a spin. That is what I know of from our side.
Okay. So let me ask you the second question then, which is I'm going to move into testing and performance. How do you test foldable UI if you actually don't have a foldable device? What's the best way?
Yeah, if you are so unlucky you don't have a foldable phone, we do have some remote test labs at Samsung. So as long as you got a Samsung account, which I believe a lot of people do have, you can go in free, pick a physical device. We have a whole range. I think it's going all the way back to S8 up to our latest series, S series, and also A series are there. Foldable phones, clearly. And you can simply just book a time slot, upload your game to this device in that time slot and test it out. And since it's physical devices, you get a pretty good idea of, does the game react as you expected. And it's also good just for checking if it actually runs great on like performance wise, just in general. It doesn't have to be UI, but yeah.
Awesome. So then talking about performance and testing in general, Miha, what's your process to make sure that the UI renders well and doesn't impact the game performance too much?
Well, I can really say a lot about this topic. I enjoy it a lot, but yeah, like in our case, the performance aspect of the implementation already starts before the actual implementation. So what we do have at the company is some internal rules, on how to build the UI. And then every developer kind of needs to obey these rules, and already from the day one when we start the implementation. And usually the project architecture or the infrastructure already kind of enforces some of these rules, right? So for example, we would have our own way for adding texts, adding buttons, adding images, or some other elements onto the UI. And usually it would be even harder for you to use something different in order to achieve the same visual look at the end. And this way we kind of enforce that we have consistent approach for all these elements, and then it's actually a lot easier to optimize this thing, right? Because you only have one approach and you only need to optimize one thing. And then after the implementation, we also have some kind of automated tests for testing the user interfaces. And this way we catch some of the regressions that we cannot enforce in the implementation phase that I mentioned earlier. However, a bunch of profiling is still done manually. And this is nowadays still, unfortunately, the best way to catch all the regressions. But the downside is that it takes a bit of time, right? But then when we are profiling the UI, we are usually focusing on, classic things like number of draw calls, overdraw. We observe moments when the UI gets rebuilt and try to reduce these moments. We try to split up the canvases, use twinning code instead of animation clips. So we are basically doing all the steps that you could find in different optimization guides or books. Besides all that, we are also consistently sharing the knowledge and good practices internally among the team members, so that also people on other projects are aware of the importance of the performance aspect. Plus, on the other hand, that they also know how to tackle these performance-related problems when they encounter them.
Great. Just with time, I'm just going to move on really quickly. So many questions. let's just talk about the final topic, official topic we had on the agenda, which is discovering and overcoming mobile device specific challenges. Mihad, do you want to talk about any sort of mobile specific challenges, bugs, issues, things that you experienced in building your games there at Outfit 7?
Well, of course, the performance that we all already mentioned, it matters a lot when talking about mobile devices in general, because if you want to target the vast majority of all the devices out there on the market, like we do at Outfit 7, the performance part is especially important because, you know, not just because of the frame rate, also because of battery consumption that you have on the mobile devices, right? And of course, when talking about the performance UI, it's no exception, right? So that's the first thing that I want to mention. But then if you go to some other specifics, like the second thing is, which is kind of unique to the mobile devices, is maybe the notch that you have on some mobile devices, right? Actually, quite on plenty of mobile devices, you have this notch now, right? And yeah, Unity has a great way to access the notch information. However, you still need to kind of design your UI already from day one with the thought of supporting the notch, right? So it's not something that you would just forget about it and do it later. I mean, you can do it like that, but it's not the best possible way to do it. And maybe the third thing that I want to mention is handling all different aspect ratios that you also have with these different mobile devices that exists out there. And the handling of these different aspect ratios can be even like really simple in some cases, but in some cases it can get quite tricky, right? Especially when you're combining your UI with some 3D objects that you want to have on the UI, and then based on the aspect ratio, you want to reposition or rescale or resize these 3D objects based on the aspect ratio. And how we are usually tackling those problems is, yeah, sometimes you need to have some specific special script which will handle this particular case. But at the end, this is not only the problem just for the implementation for the developers, but it can also represent the problem for the QA, because maybe they don't have this particular device which is problematic in-house, right, in order for them to test on this. So yeah, there is a lot of these mobile specific challenges, but they're all solvable, I would say.
Yeah, and I saw someone ask a question about localization, right? Like different languages and have different lengths of words. So there's all that kind of consideration as well that compounds with mobile sort of thing. So on adaptive performance, can you benefit from that with when we think about UI design?
Yeah, I believe you can, but even though adaptive performance is mainly meant for in-game graphics, you can change the resolution of the UI with adaptive performance. But I think in general you probably have to be a little bit careful with that due to low resolution. If your UI become too low resolution, it can be difficult to see. And since the UI is representing the polishness, is that the word? How polished your game is, that you may not want that, but it is possible to use adaptive performance, especially when it comes to like 3D animated characters and assets that lie on top of and being used as a UI. You can definitely use it for that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Hey, we only have a few minutes left. So number one, I want to say thank you to all of our panelists. Super informative. I could probably speak for another 2 or 3 hours on this topic because I just learned so much today. I want to note that we have over 100 questions in the Q&A, and I'm sure that the team, Adam Madison team, will actually be able to bring those together. We'll sort of look at those internally as well and look for a way to actually hopefully address a lot of those questions in maybe a blog post or something else later on. I do want to give a shout out for our Discord channel as well, Discord server, sorry. We have some really great sort of engagement there with our Unity engineers around stuff like UI design and mobile development. Because I can't share my screen, I can't give you all the, oh, great. Someone's going to do it for me.
Magic.
Awesome. I had quickly made screenshots for all of this. So great. All right. So the first thing I want to do is give a shout out to our ebook that's coming soon. It's going to be out before the end of the year around UI design and how to implement it in Unity. It's not exclusively for mobile, but it does cover mobile very, really great detail. The second thing I wanted to sort of show was the UI toolkit. We mentioned it a few times, but didn't really get into a really good amount of depth there. But if you go to that website, unity.com/UI-toolkit, you'll see a bunch of things around why UI toolkit is kind of like the future of UI development within Unity, both at design time and runtime. But even more so, that bottom right quadrant there's a QR code or the URL. We want to really get your feedback to make sure that we're building UI toolkit in the right way that will benefit you. Finally, I wanted to also, as I said, thank you panelists for being part of this. Thank you audience for being part of this and giving us so many questions and comments. I've loved reading all of them. I wish I had time to do more, but if you do have questions for a specific person, we've put all our contact details here for you to reach out to us. Mine is Mr. Andy Puppy. I am everywhere as Mr. Andy Puppy. You'll find me wherever you want to try and find me. And then you can see Miha, Soren, Benoit, and Stefania are all listed here for you to be able to reach out to if you have any follow-up questions or feedback. And then make sure you get pre-registering for that ebook by going to resources.unity.com/games.
Yes, I just want to highlight that for anyone who's looking for specific tips and guides of like do A, do B, do C for UI implementation, please pre-register for that ebook. It is an amazing resource. I wish I had it when I was creating game UI. It is thick and full of practical tips. So please pre-register. It's going to be great, and you can actually download the demo that is available on the asset store. I believe it's linked on the same page, and it's a whole project that you can check out and see how this game UI was built in UI Toolkit using our newest features. It has animation, it has sparkles. So yeah, please check it out and let us know what you think using that survey link. Super valuable to have everyone's feedback, and it's the best way for us to sort through that data and make sure we're building the right stuff. Thank you.
Thanks, Stefania. So with that, we're at time. Thank you all. Have a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and see you next time.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.